Welcome to another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. Hey all, welcome to yet another episode of the Higher Line podcast. You know, oftentimes I talk with you about not just complaining, not just commenting on what's going on in the world, but actually doing something and getting involved. And today we've got a guest that is doing just that. He's going to step out of his private life, out of his private life of business, and step into the public spotlight, which in this case is going to be running for Senate in the great state of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. So I've got Mr. Rob Davies on today. Rob for PA Senate 12.com is his website. And what I wanted to dig into today is not just who Rob is and the platform he's running on. If you don't live in Pennsylvania, you may say, what does this matter? Well, it matters a lot because collectively, all of the state reps and state senators across our nation run the country, so to speak. What happens in states matters on a national level, even if it's not a state that you live in. And one of the takeaways that I want for you guys out listening or viewing today, a takeaway for you is how you can affect change where you live. So, Rob, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. What do people need to know about you?
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me on your podcast today, Mickey.
Of course.
Like you said, my name's Rob Davies. I'm a candidate for state Senate here in Pennsylvania. My district is in Montgomery County, just outside Philadelphia. It covers about a third or so of the county. It's 250,000 people approximately. I'm the Republican candidate. In early January, this wasn't something that I was even considering or thinking about. And some friends in my township came to me and said, "Hey, Rob, would you be interested in running for state Senate?" Now, they know me because I've been involved with my local, community.
Sewer district, right? You're the chairman.
Yeah, I'm chairman of our sewer authority, and I'm an elected judge of election. And I gave it some thought, and I thought, why shouldn't I do it? It's a good time in my life personally for a variety of reasons. And the option was either I do it or they might not have a candidate at all. And I think this is a seat where we can be competitive. Historically, it has been a Republican seat. 4 years ago in a wave election, the son of the previous senator fought a good race, but lost by about 7,000 votes.
Okay.
And
what part of Pennsylvania is this district in?
It's in Montgomery County in the southeast. We're just outside Philadelphia in what they call the collar counties.
Okay. How far is that from, say, Gettysburg?
Probably an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes.
Okay. And how many people live in that district?
In the district, all of our state Senate districts are approximately 250,000 people.
Okay. All of them across the whole state?
Approximately. The goal, I think, is about 260,000.
Okay.
Is the target.
Okay.
And they just redistricted everybody.
And does Philadelphia fall inside of that?
No.
Okay.
My district ends at the Philadelphia county line.
Gotcha. So what type of issues, let's just talk on a state level, what type of stuff is going on in Pennsylvania that should give residents pause? What type of stuff's going on there that's challenging to the state right now?
Well, I think like, most other states, the economy is probably the number one issue.
Okay.
We're getting killed with inflation, and food and fuel, just like everybody else. The difference in Pennsylvania, I guess, is that we're very fortunate. We sit on top of an ocean of natural gas. And our government here locally, as well as the federal government, but locally, the state government has been doing everything it can to slow down and delay bringing online more production. Part of that is the Green New Deal approach to energy.
How does a state senator affect that?
For instance, one of the things that I've been hearing is that if you want to build a temporary road or a drilling pad, you need to get a basic permit for moving dirt. It's called a soil erosion and sediment control permit.
Mm-hmm.
The DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection here, says that should take 14 days. Now, it never does, but that's the standard they're supposed to meet. Right now, if you want to build a temporary road to a drilling site, you're looking at 6 months.
Wow.
So in practical reality, it means it doesn't get built, it doesn't get done, because it's not worth the time and effort and the legal fees and fighting the fight.
Understood. So as a state senator, how can you affect change in that? Is that something that office has purview on? Are you going to try to write legislation to reduce time that that department has to look at these construction projects? I mean, they're definitely. So I spent years in construction, and there's this fine line, right, between government's intervention in our life and then protecting people from citizens that don't look at the world maybe in a good sense of community, because you got guys out there that are going to tear through areas that they shouldn't, not control erosion, have garbage leaking off of these drilling sites that leak into waterways and aquifers and lakes and ponds and stuff like that. So there's a balance, right?
There is. But this type of permit is pretty basic for moving dirt in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I have family who have been in the transportation construction field for decades. They've both retired in the past couple of years from working for the state. So I'm pretty familiar with this kind of thing. And if you can't even build the road to the drilling pad, then you don't drill.
Sure.
It's really that simple. So yeah, but as a state senator, there's oversight of government agencies, and we can call them, before us and hold hearings and, threaten to cut their budgets. And ultimately, the legislator has the power of the purse. And so if you threaten to take away their money or shut them down, or, whatever is, would be necessary in a particular case, then maybe you can get some action. And ultimately, we also need a Republican governor.
Do you feel like, maybe you don't have an answer, do you feel like the agenda in your state, or the Green Deal, as you're talking about, the new Green Deal, on a national and world level, is coming through with this environmental department in your state, and that they are limiting gas production through the limiting of these permits? Do you think that there's
absolutely. Absolutely. That's the agenda. The agenda is to reduce the amount of natural gas that we can access so that we won't use it, because if you make natural gas more scarce, you drive up the price.
Sure.
If you drive up the price, that makes it non-competitive. That means that things like wind and solar, which are technologies that aren't really here yet, become more financially competitive.
When you say aren't really here, do you say aren't really here in the world or in Pennsylvania?
I would say that the technology isn't here to provide the level and quality and stability and reliability of power that we need.
Sure. Real quick, let's change gears just so folks understand your background. You're starting to talk a little bit about the economy and some financial stuff. Are you qualified to talk about that?
I think so. I have a degree in international relations and a minor in economics. I spent almost my first decade after college, working for an econometric consulting company, where I was responsible for all of the U.S. financial data.
So what does that mean to the layman? So what kind of data were you parsing and cataloging?
For most of the time I was there, I dealt with Federal Reserve Bank data. So money supply data, industrial production, consumer prices, producer prices, anything that you're going to see if you turn on CNBC and they talk about, in terms of the government economic release, I dealt with that data if it was from the U.S. government.
Okay, very cool.
So I became very familiar with it. And then I was interested in getting a little more into the user side of the data rather than cataloging it and providing information to economists when they didn't understand why there were anomalies or seeming anomalies in the data. And I found a small money management firm not too far from where I lived, and they were looking for somebody with my background. And I was interested in working a little bit more in the investment side. And so it was a good match, and I've been there for the past 24 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And currently I'm their senior futures trader. We trade what are known as equity indexes. So they're synthetic products. Futures markets began with trading in physical commodities like corn and wheat. And they've advanced quite a bit in the last few decades. And now you can buy an S&P 500 contract for a certain date in the future. And that's what we use to take long and short positions in the market.
I see. So your approach coming into the state Senate, it sounds like you've got a pretty good working knowledge of economics, finance. What's your take on things like education? Let's go to that next. What do you feel the government's role on a state level and a national level is in educate? What role should, in your opinion, the government have on a state and national level in educating our children? That's a better way to phrase it.
At a national level, I think the government should be very constrained from interfering. We did not have a Department of Education in this country until the 1970s. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find evidence that it's done any good. But at a state level, here in Pennsylvania, we have school districts, which are frequently multi-municipality conglomerates.
Mm-hmm.
And they have most of the control over your public school system. The state provides oversight and in many cases funding, but the bulk of the funding comes from local property taxes here.
Same as here.
Right. And that's a pretty common model. So I think the role of the state in Pennsylvania is to provide oversight and guidance and to make sure that local school districts are doing their job correctly and maybe providing them with support. If you have an area that's particularly poor, I can see the value of making sure that the students in those districts get some advantages that the wealthier school districts have. Good computing systems, good training. What I'd like to see is less of a role of government in education, at least in the provision of it. Too often what we're seeing here is, and I think the one benefit that I can think of the past 2.5 years of lockdowns is that parents got to see into the kids' classrooms. And what they saw was not necessarily something that made them happy. They saw a lot of ideology being promoted and not as much emphasis on basics.
Mm-hmm.
And at least around here, that became sort of a springboard for people getting much more involved locally in politics. And I've been seeing that. I've met a lot of the moms and dads who weren't involved with politics before, and now they're on school boards and they're getting involved at committee levels in their party.
It seems like maybe the last 20, 30 years, and I don't know what came much before that because I wasn't paying attention to those things, but it seems like people make kids, raise kids, and then cart them off to school, and they kind of just wipe their hands of the education process. I'm making a generalization, but for the most part, other than making sure kids are getting to school, doing their homework, and I've talked to a lot of teachers. I've got friends that are in school administration, from school board level to principal, dean, that side of the house. And of course, teachers. So many parents just don't have any, I guess, interest would be the word, in what's happening. It's like, okay, I'm going to my job, kids are going to their job, and we're just trusting that the system is doing a good job. And it's kind of crazy because then, as you said, people get a look at what's happening and they don't like it. It's like, well, nobody told you couldn't look before. You just didn't.
Well, I think that's certainly true. But, I guess, my generation of people growing up going to schools in the 80s, our teachers didn't do these kinds of things.
Give me an example.
They weren't there to indoctrinate.
So give me an example of what you're talking about. Like, you're talking about lifestyle kind of things, stuff other than mathematics and science. And, well, hell, even science now is kind of a funny word in some places. Yeah, you use the word science and people say things like allegedly.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're talking about is cultural issues, critical race theory, promoting transgenderism in the schools. And, there's only so many hours a day that teachers have to teach, and they really need to be focused on the fundamentals, I think. Mathematics, good grammar skills, reading skills, a good knowledge of history. I studied a lot of history, and it was probably my favorite subject in school.
Me too.
And I see a great value to people knowing that. I mean, I grew up in Philadelphia, and in 1976, the bicentennial celebration was a huge deal in the city.
Sure.
And, we did all kinds of special events for that in my elementary school. And I thought there was a lot of value to it. I think we learned a lot about American history that maybe we wouldn't have if it hadn't been that particular time frame and the focus was on the bicentennial and the founders and the Constitution and all that at the time.
I dig it. I guess in some ways, and just to play the devil's advocate, people look at something like that, and that is a cultural thing. Should we continue to tell the narrative of, and this is just me playing devil's advocate, of white people coming to a new continent and slaughtering the indigenous people that lived here and being slaveholders, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in some ways, I travel a lot. As I travel, I try to visit many. I love Philly, by the way. I've had private tours and public tours of the Liberty Bell, of Constitution Hall, and many of the other sites there. But what's the saying? History's written by those with the most ink. And on my travels, I'll visit places. I just talked about this yesterday as a guest on a podcast. I visited the Berkeley Plantation in Virginia, one of the signers of the Declaration, Benjamin Harrison. Huge plantation. It looks just like it did in the 1700s. A monster farm plantation that was completely run and farmed by slaves. And I looked through some of the catalogs there of the history of those slaves, names, ages, birth dates, all that information. And I guess where I'm going with that is like that. It's easy to like gloss over that stuff and just look at like the feel good information, So I think the pendulum swung kind of far though, where now a kid goes to school. I have a friend that just moved from California, just to add this point, and I'll go back to you. He just moved to Texas. I said, why'd you move? Because he loved where he was at. He said, my 8-year-old daughter was seeing penises on a daily basis. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And this is not, he didn't make this up. There was a certain boy, 8 years old, that was coming into the girls' bathroom or changing room for gym class, maybe. He talked to the school and they said, well, that boy identifies as a female. And he just said, well, that's nuts. My 8-9-year-old daughter, whatever she is, less than 10, doesn't need to be around that. And they're like, tough, deal with it. And he actually ended up being kind of threatened by the school district that if he didn't kind of cease and desist from his line of questioning and pushing the envelope, that a lawsuit could be raised against him, somewhere along the lines of like a hate crime.
There was actually a case in Canada not long ago where a fellow was actually thrown in jail because he refused to use the pronouns that his daughter preferred. That was considered a form of domestic violence.
Wow. That's insane.
That's insane.
That's insane. So as a state senator, as people continue to kind of proliferate this behavior, what stance will you take? How will you stand up to that to combat it?
I mean, I suppose if the parents are okay with it, then, then you have to be accepting of it. But I think up until recently, parents didn't know about it. And so what I would support is transparency. So a school has to post the curriculum, the reading materials and everything online prior to the beginning of the school year, and update it as necessary during the school year so that parents can have access to everything their children are going to be exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, these school boards need to be more accountable to parents. So if you're going to hold a public meeting, these parents have a right to attend, they have a right to speak, and they have a right not to be harassed by the Department of Homeland Security or the local police or whoever else for speaking out. And they have to be given the opportunity to speak. That's the whole point. And because so many places around the country this didn't happen is why you've gotten so many more parents involved at the school district level. And I think it's a great revolution. I think that's going to translate up the chain to higher level offices.
Okay. You're not afraid of becoming a marked man? You've lived long enough. You're not afraid of this crazy, somewhat insurgency into our lives attacking you. I don't mean physically, but attacking your character, attacking who you are.
I am who I am, and I'm not going to hide from it or run away from an issue just because it might be controversial with a pretty radical extremist fringe of our country.
Mm-hmm.
When I was out knocking on doors to get my petition signed to get on the ballot, I met with a real estate agent. He's a gentleman in his probably mid to late 70s. He's been a real estate agent for decades.
Okay.
He relayed to me two interesting stories. The first was he had just finished up a required training, continuing education training class to keep his real estate license, in which he was told he could no longer use the terms master bedroom, family room to describe real estate because they were insensitive and whatever, politically incorrect. The other story, he had been on a phone with a woman.
I haven't heard that one yet. That's so stupid.
It's stupid, and it's coming to you.
Yeah.
And the other story is he had been on the phone with a woman who was interested in seeing a house he was selling. So he meets her at the house. She gets out of the car and she's in tears. He asks her, what's wrong? What's going on? And she was upset because her grandchildren in the 5th grade were being exposed to what she considered to be pornography in the classroom as part of their curriculum. And he was shocked. And to be honest, at the time, I wasn't sure I really believed it since it was like a second or third hand story. But recently at our state capitol, a group of Republican state senators put up a display. They took images from some of these books, censored them, and put them up. And they were told they had to take them down because they were inappropriate and pornographic.
And this is the same stuff that the kids are seeing
in the school library, in the school classroom. Yeah.
That's so.
And so they were working on a bill to stop the use of explicit materials in classrooms and to make sure that things are age appropriate. Now, my opponent voted against that measure and called it homophobic.
Just to play devil's advocate a little, I went to a Lutheran school, and you're just a couple years older than me. I was in grade school in the 80s and in high school in the 90s. Um, and I remember even at like a Christian school like that, reading books like Go Ask Alice. Was that the name of the book? It was about the young girl that kind of like lost her mind on acid. And actually, our eighth grade teacher read us the book and it was like about a drug induced, drug fueled psychosis that this girl put herself into. She's in a mental hospital. She's imagining she's in a coffin. She's ripping her own flesh off with her fingernails. Like, it was just crazy stuff. Or Catcher in the Rye. That was like, which is a J.D. Salinger, very famous award-winning book. And I remember at that time, parents thinking, oh, these kids shouldn't read this stuff. Or Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, like books like this, where the N-word is used in the book. And it's this slice of history and stuff like that was looked at as inappropriate. Again, playing devil's advocate, like, where do you draw the line, or where this it's all based on morals and ethics and what we deem, you said culturally acceptable. Like,
right.
That's why I believe that this stuff should be a local choice. If the people of Chicago or DC or Philly or Houston want this stuff, then so be it. But if the people in another community don't, then they should have that right. I think that's a problem when we have these national and large state education systems dictating to all. What's your thoughts on that? I know we kind of covered that a little bit.
Largely, I agree with you. It should definitely be more of a matter for local school districts, but there's also a limit. If you get a school district that wants to, show an adult movie in a classroom for some reason, that's probably not appropriate for a fifth grader at any level. And I think a lot of the problem is these things are happening in a classroom, and the administrators either turn a blind eye to it or are complicit in it. But then when they get found out, they'll say, oh, well, we didn't know, it's the teacher's fault. Well, it's not going to be the teacher's fault if they're required to post the curriculum. Now, if the teacher then violates that curriculum by bringing in other inappropriate material, well, then there should be sanctions for that. But, one of the examples they like to give is Romeo and Juliet and The Diary of Anne Frank. Now, I don't know too many fifth graders who are ready for either of those books.
Sure.
Especially, anything Shakespearean, that takes a little bit of education and brain power to get your head around just the language of it. And I don't think that those would be targeted by the legislation that's been proposed here. But if you see some of the stuff that they were showing, then, it is clearly inappropriate for children under, the age of 10.
What happened when when this material was put up in your state house, who said it had to be taken down?
I believe it was the police force in the Capitol.
Do they have the ability to say that?
Probably.
They work for the legislature.
Well, they do, but I imagine they have some degree of independence as well.
Okay. So was it taken down?
Yes.
That's interesting. I'm going to do some research on that. That's something that's worth posting on our social media. Change gears again. Firearms. Growing up in the birthplace of our country's freedom. That's where the Declaration was signed. That's where so many of the founders spent so much time. Originally, Philly, I believe, was going to be our country's capital. I think it actually was. For a time. It was. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I grew up around firearms. I started shooting before I entered kindergarten. Actually, the summer right before kindergarten. And I've been interested in it my entire life. It was just recently endorsed by the Gun Owners of America. I'm a recommended candidate by Firearm Owners Against Crime, which is a Pennsylvania organization. I believe in our Second Amendment. Again, I've studied the history of the founding and what the colonists were able to do against the greatest army in the world at that time.
What's your take on, okay, so you're a state senator. Fast forward, when is the general election, by the way?
November 8th.
Okay, so November 8th, you get voted in. You start in 23, you're a state senator, which is a big deal. And some other horrific shooting takes place, like what's been happening across the country. How do you proceed? What's your course of action when the citizens are saying we got to do something?
Well, a lot of times we're being driven to do something, and the things that we're being told we have to do aren't going to do any good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't see how a red flag law is going to actually help the situation, because it's very highly targeted on seizing a person's firearms. But there are a whole lot of other things that somebody can cause mayhem with that they're being left behind with. And more importantly, you've now angered that person because you're violating his rights, and it's almost always going to be a he. And you're not providing him with counseling or any kind of help. I mean, if he actually is a danger, there are plenty of laws already on the books that allow for civil commitment in the state.
Okay. Do you think that, so the Bill of Rights, what's 1791? Was that when it was adopted? I think it was 91.
I believe so.
Have to fact check that, but much longer after the Declaration was signed, right?
Mm-hmm.
The war was years long. People that look at the state of affairs of America right now say, well, times have changed. We should change some of this stuff. And they use things like the Volstead Act or women's suffrage or the freeing of slaves to leverage their point of the fact that the Bill of Rights can be changed. I think 27 times in total. We've 17 additions to the Bill of Rights. I think there only 27 amendments. Is that right?
I believe we're at the 27th. Yes.
Yeah. So 17 we added or changed, amended since the Bill of Rights was drafted. So they take that as a, hey, maybe we can do something here. Do you think the Second Amendment should be changed or amended?
No, I don't. I think when they said that a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state, I think that was very true. And I think we often gloss over that. People who want to take the guns away focus on, well, they say militia. And on our side, we usually say shall not be infringed. But in between there's a very important phrase, necessary to the security of a free state. And I believe that's true. We could have security in a police state, or we could have anarchy, but that's not security.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, if you look at just what's been happening in this country for the past 2 years, where police have been defunded, where police have been told to give people room to riot and burn. I mean, I watched live on TV a helicopter news shot of 12 burning police cars in Philadelphia.
It's insanity.
Yeah. And, people, and before they burned them, the people were going through the cars, looting them. They had bolt cutters to cut chains or whatever might be locked down. And nothing was done about it.
Yeah.
So, to say that we don't need it, well, you don't need it until you do need it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't disagree. I think that's well said. We do like to fixate on little key words or buzzwords, and your point about the history, it's something that I talk about often. We can't just read the couple lines of these amendments. We need to understand the totality of the thinking, the forward thinking, the mindset of what these guys were driving towards, who they read, Locke and Hobbes and Montesquieu, these kind of people, and Plato
and what they had
Socrates.
just been through.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. How do you feel about things like concealed carry permits? Do you feel a permit should be required for somebody to legally possess a firearm for self-protection, or should they just be able to have that gun wherever they want it?
Well, speaking as someone who got his first license to carry in Pennsylvania from the city of Philadelphia in 1995, I would say at a minimum, states need to be shall issue, where if you meet the requirements, they have to give you the permit. But we're now up to, I guess, half or maybe slightly more than half the states have what's now known as constitutional carry.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, to me, that seems to make a lot of sense. If all they're going to do, I mean, essentially, at least here in Pennsylvania, the process is you go through a background check to buy a firearm from a dealer. To get the license to carry, you go through a background check, which is essentially the same thing. Now, it used to be in my county that you could go in, hand them your paperwork, they would run the standard background check, and you would walk out with your permit. Now they're delaying it and making it take more time because the Democrats have taken control of the county. But they still issue it. It just takes more time. So I don't see how there's any real benefit to the license. I mean, the benefit, I guess, for me would be if I wanted to go to another state and there was reciprocity.
Sure. So if your constituents, Rob is now state senator, and you've got constituents calling upon you to say, hey, we're trying to run a bill up to make Pennsylvania a constitutional carry state. Is it, by the way? I don't believe it is.
No, Pennsylvania is a shall issue state.
I thought so. So if that came into play, would you support it?
Constitutional carry? Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, that's a big deal. So, I mean, folks listening, what I'm trying to do here, listeners, viewers, is help you guys understand that we're talking about the founders, right? We're talking about the men that sat in a July and August sweaty Constitution Hall and put pen to paper to defy the crown and start our revolution. They were shopkeepers and merchants and doctors and lawyers and fishermen and farmers, plantation owners, some good men, some not such good men, but they were people, flesh and blood, like Rob is here, and he's deciding to step up and do this, which I'm guessing you're going to take a pay cut to go do this. It's probably going to be, sometimes folks look at the economics of this stuff and they say, oh, politicians are just trying to make money. And it's like, well, I mean, you can make a living doing it, but if you're used to any kind of a professional income, for most people, it's not a pay raise. And the other side of it is now your life becomes scrutinized by everybody for everything. I've got a lot of friends involved in politics, and some of them won't even go out to dinner because they just don't want somebody to see them having a beer or whatever, having a laugh, because somebody's always judging you. So I only bring that up, not talking to you, Rob, but people listening, because it's a sacrifice to do it. So one, I appreciate, even though I don't live in your state, that you're rising to the occasion to carry the load of liberty for the people of your state. But I want folks listening to understand you can do it in your own state. And when I shut up here in a second, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the process of how you got on the ballot, which is not the same everywhere, but there is a similar path in most states. And then we'll talk about some of the challenges that you're facing to run a campaign. Does that sound okay?
Oh, great. Sure.
So you are put up to the task by some friends, local people. Hey, Rob, why don't you run for state senate? You went home late in bed, fantasized of yourself up there in the state house and in your senator's office, and you said, this sounds
more
like
of a nightmare.
So talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, the first step is to get petitions signed. For my office, it requires 500 valid signatures by voters in your district, in
registered
your party.
Voters. Okay.
And having never done that kind of thing before, That seems like a very daunting task. The second problem with it was normally it's a 3-week period. And this time, because there were some delays in finalizing exactly what the district encompassed because of the census and redistricting, we had 10 days to do it.
So you guys physically took paper documents, probably from a county clerk's office?
No, well, actually, we printed them ourselves.
Okay, so off the State Board of Elections website or something like that. And you go door to door, and it's got to be filled out just so, because it's a legal document.
Right.
So you need the voter's address, most likely, their full legal name that they'd have on their voter ID or voter registration card.
Right.
And I'm assuming if you needed 500, you probably got 1,000.
We got 1,003.
Okay. And why would you do that?
Well, the reason is if you don't have 500 valid signatures, you don't get on the ballot. And if you have 501 signatures, you can bet the opposition's going to have lawyers scrutinize every one of them and get as many thrown out as they can to get you under 500.
And they're going to find somebody that's not,
who didn't have their middle initial correct, or
and it doesn't mean the person did something criminal or anything. They could have moved and didn't update their address with your state department, or
a common problem here would be if you live in a town or a borough that have the same name and one could be inside the other. You have to make sure you put which one you're living in as your voting district. If you're in the borough and you write township or don't write anything, then it can be declared invalid.
So that was like legal hurdle number one. You got to get all that stuff done, and then you turn it all in, and the State Board of Elections in your county put you onto the ballot.
Correct.
So you got a primary election then.
And I was unopposed. I mean,
okay, great.
Obviously, since they recruited me to do it because they didn't have a candidate. And if they had found someone else, I probably would have said, it's yours.
You're saying the party put
the party. And so the party then held a meeting where all of the committee people voted on, who to endorse for various positions. And that puts your name on their sample ballot that they hand out at polling places.
Are you a party politics guy, or are you more of a free thinker? Like, will you toe the
I've
party
been a Republican
line?
since I was old enough to vote. I've often been at odds with people in my party.
What type of things would you be at odds with?
We had a pro-choice candidate for governor several years ago, and the Democrat, oddly enough, was a pro-life candidate.
Okay.
So I voted for the Democrat in that election.
So you voted
my conscience
for issues that matter to you, not because of a party. Yeah, people will go in and they just vote right down the line of party people. I'm kind of over party politics. I understand the reason for it. I was involved with our Republican Party as a vice chairman, which is kind of how you and I came together. And I think it in some ways breeds it breeds a lack of clarity in a lot of ways, and it breeds a lot of complacency. Like, people don't draw hard lines and they just put this blanket over them, and like, it's okay because I fit under this umbrella or under this blanket. And it's like, no, what are you actually going to do? Right. I've interviewed a lot of people over the years, not just in this kind of a public forum, but interviewed them to help them, because I don't want to waste my time with somebody. You and I had a phone call, and what are you going to do about this or that? Wait, you want to go be a leader in your state government or city government, and you have no idea what you're going to do? Why go? Why
right.
go? So you got over that hurdle. You got through the primary. So just so people understand, because I think a lot of folks don't understand this process, and it sounds daunting. The primary, you could have had 50 candidates in that primary. So you would have had to beat 1 or 50 other people just to get on the ballot to go to the general election, right? So right now you have a Democratic candidate. Do you have an independent or anything like that that's running?
I don't think there's an independent, but there is a Democrat. She's the incumbent.
And how long she been in?
4 years.
What's her background a little bit?
As I understand it, she was an assistant district attorney, a prosecutor.
Okay.
And then she became a nurse, and now she's a state senator.
Some pretty good life experiences.
Yeah.
What's your challenges now? So now you're in the marathon part of this. You did the sprint, you got your on the ballot, you got over the hurdle. I'm sure you've had lots of meetings with friends and family, talking and strategizing and spitballing and trying to figure out what life will look like and what it needs to look like. What are your challenges right now as you face this marathon over the summer into the fall leading up to the election?
Well, I guess there are two primary hurdles. The one that I've been advised by the experts in this is fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I've never had to do before. I've never been a salesman. So, and raising money is about selling yourself, to convince people that you're worthy of their dollars,
mm-hmm.
which is hard for me because asking people to give you money for a promise to do the right thing down the road is tough. So that's my number one challenge right at this time.
All right. So let me jump in real quick because there's no sense in right now being the perfect time. People can donate to your campaign.
Yes.
By scanning the QR code or going to Rob for PA Senate 12.com. They can donate $5 or 5,000. What is it? You got caps in your state?
We have no caps.
No cap. Nice. There are some in my state. So somebody could give you $1 million.
They could.
What do you think you're going to need to run this race?
It's hard to say.
What have some of your predecessors spent in the last decade or so? A couple 100,000, 300-400 grand?
Well, when I first started down this path, I was at a meeting of Republicans for, I think, petition signing. I was told $250,000.
Okay.
At the next meeting, I was told $500,000. And after that, I stopped asking, but I was told I need $1 million to be competitive.
Well,
4 years ago, the candidate who ran for the Republicans raised about $800,000.
Did he spend it all or she spend it all?
He did not spend it all, as I understand it, but I'm not 100% sure of how that worked.
So folks listening, I mean, it gets, people see these dollar amounts and they get angry because they say, it shouldn't cost that much. And first of all, it's not tax money or anything like that paying for it, right? It's oftentimes the candidate's own treasure and friends and family and businesses that want to put this person in. The stuff costs what it costs because the general public is basically being sold, as you said, a candidate, just like we're sold a water bottle or a car or a soda pop or anything else. And the price goes up as it becomes more of a battle, and it could cost nothing. It could cost pennies if the good people of your community just did some homework and figure out, okay, who's running, who's going to be best for our community, for our state. And it could cost nothing. It could cost you $1,000 and you could be in. So my challenge to people watching this, 1, donate. I'm going to donate. I hope you donate. 2, share this podcast. It's not just because we care about Rob's campaign in Pennsylvania. Imagine what would happen if we collectively, me and whoever's watching and listening, if around the country we supported good candidates, be them in Ohio or California or Oregon or Florida or Texas or Illinois or all points in between. If we collectively supported those people, the power of community is worth more than the dollar. And that is, in fact, how our republic was formed. It wasn't with money. Soldiers were barefoot. We had to steal boats to cross the Delaware River. We had to steal cannons from Fort Ticonderoga. I mean, literally, it was by hook or crook to get it done. And why I'm saying this is we're used to this world now where we have limitless supplies of cash. The government just borrows pretend money constantly. It doesn't need to be. Rob needs money. I told him I would do this with him. He did not come to me and ask us to do this today. So I'm doing it because if not us, then who gets this stuff done? Who puts the people into these elected positions? One, you got to want to do it. And if it's not you that wants to do it, not Rob, but us listening, I don't want to do it. I like my life. I don't want to go to Springfield, my state capital, and do it. So if I see somebody that's willing and has the chops, why not support them? So that's my request to you. Support this dude, support people like him, and then share this podcast, not for my sake, not even for Rob's sake, but for all of our sakes. That's something that I think we need to get better at collectively. I'll send it back to you. So you're raising cash. Mm-hmm. How is the campaign going? What kind of obstacles are you up against? What kind of pushback are you getting? So you've got support from some gun owning groups, mm-hmm. which is I think a big deal, because people that support the Second Amendment are usually very politically motivated to get out and vote and tell people. Who else is supporting you?
I've been working with a group called the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Coalition.
Okay.
They're local to me. And I've been in contact with some free market organizations that I'm hoping will get behind my campaign.
How about things like Farm Bureau or
I have
Association?
A lunch meeting with them set up for August, and my local Chamber of Commerce. They haven't scheduled it yet, but I'm told that I will be invited to meet with them. And so business owners, farmers, regular everyday people.
I'm assuming you're going to make yourself available in your region. So if people listening are in your region, they can get you to come out and speak.
Absolutely.
How about if we've got some folks listening that might be in another part of the country, but want to hear what you have to say to motivate them and maybe talk about the process so that they too can get involved in state or local government? Would you be willing to chat with them?
Oh, I'll talk with anybody at any time.
What if I want to meet you behind a gas station just to smoke some Swisher Sweets and drink some malt liquor? Would you do that?
Well, I'm not a drinker and I'm not a smoker.
I just thought I'd see where you'd go with that. I appreciate the response. Here's what I think we should do. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to petition the audience as to what your thoughts are to make America a better place and how you're going to go about doing that when you become state senator. The floor is yours, sir.
Oh, thank you. These past 2 years have been difficult for, I think, most of us. And I think more important than where I stand on any particular issue, whether I'm for this or for that, I think taking a more general look at a person's philosophy and where they stand relative to the universe, I guess. I believe in smaller government, broadly speaking. There are things that, our government at the state level has a role in. There are things our federal government has a role in. But generally speaking, I would like to see less government. I know there's not too many people out there who think that they pay too little in taxes, that the government isn't too involved in aspects of their life. Someone dies, you have to pay this tax and that tax and go through all these forms and letters. And, it's a real hassle. And I think the average person just doesn't want to be bothered with it. And I think, to be perfectly honest, I think a lot of people just don't bother with it. Their mother dies. They don't contact an estate attorney and pay thousands of dollars to help them settle what is probably a very small estate anyway. The family just sits down and decides what's going to happen. They come to an agreement and they do it. Now, when my mother passed a year and a half ago, We contacted a lawyer. I have paid them thousands of dollars. We have paid, thousands of dollars in taxes and fees and, $20 for a death certificate. And you need a bunch of them because everybody that you ever dealt with financially needs a copy of it. We need to scale back the intrusion of government into our lives. Yeah, I'm sure every time a politician passes one of these laws and puts these things into effect, there's a good reason at the time.
Mm-hmm.
There was a good reason to lock down businesses during COVID, except that there weren't. It's a violation of individual liberty. It's a violation of economic freedom. And we have to stand for those broad general principles, regardless of the time or the circumstance.
I dig that, man.
That's my approach philosophically. I believe in the free market. It's not perfect. It's not always the proper tool for every situation. If you have a monopoly situation, where you can't, have a free market competition because you can only have one sewer system in a community. You're not going to have 10 pipes running to your house and you get to decide who's going to give you the best price.
Yeah.
So there's a role for government. And when there is a role, it should be at the lowest level, closest to the people that's possible.
I like it, man. I want to see you get elected. I want to come visit you when you're at the Capitol, get a picture in your Senate office, and then
you'll always be welcome.
I appreciate that. I want to see it get done. So I look forward to spending the next few months chatting and seeing how we can brainstorm to get some exposure. Do you have any social media that people can see? I
do.
You on?
I have a Facebook, a Twitter, and Instagram, as well as my website. And if you go to the website, there's links to all of those.
Very good. Very good. I think we should do a live discussion on Facebook and Instagram. We'll set that up and we'll chat with some of the followers that we have and answer some questions and kind of get more of your viewpoints out there. Pro-gun, pro-constitution, pro-liberty, pro-America. I dig it, man. You guys that have listened, go support this guy. Get involved. The load of liberty is not carried by no one. Someone has to pick it up. And if not you, then who? And in this case, it's going to be Rob. So it is incumbent upon us, even if it's not in your state, dig in a little bit, support good candidates. If you've got friends in the great state of Pennsylvania, contact them and say, hey, check this guy out. I saw him on a podcast. Send him the link and let them see what he's all about. Rob, thank you so very much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
100% glad that we did it. You guys remember to walk a higher line. Tell somebody you love them. Don't be dickheads. And go vote. It's very important. Visit our website, carrytrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., Carry Trainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@carrytrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@carrytrainer.com or carrytrainer.com. Hey man, what are you doing in the podcast room, Steve?
I'm writing a national anthem. It's going to be at folk festivals for Gunfighter Gunawell.
Oh.
Let me tell you about Gunfighter Gunawell. Made in the USA. Gunfighter Gunawell, 100% synthetic. It's gonna last you, baby. Yeah. Gunfighter gun oil is the best I've ever seen. It's gonna make you get everything that you've ever seen. Oh, baby, I love me some gunfighter. fighter.
Just gonna get my lighter out. I don't have it.
It wasn't even Bob Dylan. It was like a love story.